One of my favorite ways of approaching the notion of the person and of the subject is through Gabriel Marcel. Now, how many of you have read Gabriel Marcel? He's fantastic. I mean, I don't know if you watched his plays, if you've seen any of his plays. It'd be worth getting some tapes of those. It really would. And then he was also a quite good, although existentialist and almost more like a novelist or a, he called it concrete philosophy. Anyway, I just love reading him. And he was one of the founders with Martin Buber of the I-thou distinction, although he didn't himself use the words I-thou. He may have used them, but they really belonged to Martin Buber. And he had two wonderful examples of the insight that came to him. He enlisted right away in World War I, being about 20 years old or so. But he had several health problems, that eyesight and his heels and so forth, that he was put in the Missing Persons Bureau instead. And he had a great experience there. His job was to take interviews, and he made little index cards, or he got information from others of people who were missing and people were looking for them, or people who showed up, but they were looking for their contacts. And he was always astonished, he said, by the difference between the file cards. No matter how thick the file, when the living person walked into the room, he was so much different, or she was so much different from what he had imagined. And that gap, he thought, is that's something plus that an object doesn't have. Secondly, he had the idea that because he'd gone through changes in his own life, that life is psychologically a journey. You are not 5 years from now who you are today. A lot depends on the decisions you've made in the intervals and people you've met and so on and so forth. And so he'd like to stress that journey aspect of identity. And more than that, the human being is different because you have a chance to help create your own identity. And this is one of the ways in which we are like God, that we have to practice a certain providence over our own lives and give them direction, making mistakes, being converted, and pressing onward through great disappointments and crushing blows and the rest. So in part we discover who we are because there are certain talents and abilities that God has put in us and not others. So, I mean, I would love to have been a singer like my father, who had a beautiful Irish tenor voice. I cannot carry a tune. And God is not an egalitarian. And he gave us each different material to work with. So that's there, that's given. We have to assimilate that, come to recognize it, work with it. But on the other hand, we have choices. And this joins with Wojtyła when he went to describe the difference between a person and, let's say, our children and the pets they brought home. My two daughters each brought home a kitten from school or somewhere, promising to take care of it. We would never have to worry about it and nourish them, which was fine until they graduated and moved away and went off to college, and we were imprisoned with those two suckers, and we couldn't go anywhere without finding a cat sitter. But one difference is that the children can reflect back on what they've done and come to see what was wrong in it and change accordingly. And looking forward, they make certain life choices which make some things more probable in their life and other things less probable. So the subject is reflective and then makes choices. And in this way is making herself or making himself. And the creative person, if you wish. And a final example that I always loved very much is riding on the subway. Now, he doesn't notice anybody near him if the car is loaded. Neither does he want to. He treats them all as its. They're just like part of the subway car. And you kind of want to keep it that way. You don't really want a conversation with some of the people you meet on the subway car. But when he went to get off at the museum stop, he came to the exit door, and there was a young lady in a blue raincoat who came from the other direction simultaneously, and they each stopped to let the other one off, and then they both started, almost bumped into each other, backed off. Now they caught each other's eye and have a good laugh together, a good smile, and walk on into the outside. About 45 minutes later, when he's walking through the museum slowly, the girl in the blue raincoat enters. And when she catches sight of his eye, or of him and his eyes, she flashes a big smile again. They're not its, like the other people are. However, fragmentarily, they've met. They've seen a touch of each other's personality, each other's sense of humor, each other's graciousness and deference and so forth. So they meet like old friends. I love that story. It just shows the awakening, the difference between the its in the subway and this slight meeting with the person, but enough to recognize certain qualities, certain spiritual qualities, if you wish. And anyway, enough of that, but I just want to add Marcel into the mix of something that helps you prepare for what you're going to find in Wojtyła. One last point I want to make is, you know this far better than I do, John, but Wojtyła was seated beside de Lubac in at least certain of the council meetings. And he was working on the person.
The acting person, yeah.
The acting person. And they had many conversations about it where a mutual help to one another. Well, so much for that. How many of you have read Henri de Lubac's book, The Drama of Atheistic Humanism? No? You didn't like it, or you didn't?
Well, I didn't make all the way through it.
Okay, well, that's all right. Some people don't like it, but anyway, it's another book I recommend you. He's a very, very thoughtful, very profound theologian. And often in the press, and I was working with the press during the Vatican Council, so I'm as guilty as anybody, to tell the story, you have to have two sides. So it was the progressives versus the traditionalists. Well, those are hopeless terms, but it's just a requirement of journalism that you do that. It's like the shape of the cathedral door, and you have to work with that. If you're going to put a statue in it, you have to work with the door that's there. Well, journalism is a little bit like that. But de Lubac is one of those who gives the lie to that. They thought, mostly French, some German, Austrian, that they were recovering the past. They were agents of recovery. In a certain sense, they were more traditional than the traditionalists. They were recovering the tradition from very old strata. And what they were showing indirectly is that the so-called conservatives were rooted in the last 300 or 400 years. I studied at the Gregorian University, and I was in the last class taught by Father Zappalena and Father Tromp. Tromp had written Mystici Corporis, it was widely said. Both were very good theologians. But I used to refer to them as the best minds of the 14th century, which wasn't fair. They were actually from the 16th century, but I was trying to give them a little credit. Anyway, for what it's worth. Okay.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. I'm very glad that you remind us of Gabriel Marcel and the rich philosophy of intersubjectivity in Marcel. It could be that with my focus on subjectivity in my own presentation, the rich dimensions of intersubjectivity in Wojtyła did not get sufficient attention. But of course, you have in Wojtyła this idea of self-gift. You have this wonderful account of the experience of shame and modesty, and the very profound explorations of the intersubjectivity of persons, and not just the solitary subjectivity of a single person. So it's important to broaden our horizon when we think about Wojtyła and receive his legacy, to remember that he, no less than Marcel, in his own way, was a great thinker of the intersubjective. So, yeah, Neil, Rocco, what do you want to add something to Michael on Marcel and intersubjectivity?
2 points. One, regarding Marcel. Marcel has a profound impact on the thought of John Paul II, and you find him since the beginning in Redemptor Hominis. A large part of Redemptor Hominis is commanded by the distinction between having and being. And this distinction is taken, well, most journalists have quoted Erich Fromm. I have hold Erich Fromm in great esteem, not quite, so-and-so, but in any case he had nothing to do with John Paul II. It was Gabriel Marcel. Having and being is one of his most fundamental contributions to the philosophy of the 20th century. And I think we should put this in connection also with a large part of the developments in modern sociology. Modern sociology, to a large extent, derives from Schiller, the sociology of culture, but also the general methodology of sociology. And in this general methodology of sociology, take Alfred Schultz, he was a phenomenologist, you find one existential issue that, if you put this in connection with Wojtyła, you may better understand how the approach of Wojtyła corrects the approach of modern or contemporary social sciences. It is the problem of identity, the irreducible in man, as John said. And it is a problem that was addressed with particular vigor by Marcel. Who am I? Who is speaking when I speak? I am speaking to you. Who is speaking? And on the one hand, well, it is easy to say, he is Professor Buttiglione. Yes. What does this mean? You say professor. When you say Professor Buttiglione, you mean that what I am doing now is the implementation of a social role, the social role of a professor. Professors are supposed to speak, and students are supposed to listen. So we both in this one...
Take notes.
Take notes better. He's a better professor than myself. And these are social roles. And of course, yes, that's what we are doing and what we are. But one could say, oh, he's an Italian. Yes, in what I say, well, you start with my accent, and then you could go on with the way in which I move my hands. You could go on the fact that I quote Dante rather than, I don't know, rather than Shakespeare. Or, yes, I express a culture in which I live. And this implies also social contexts and social roles. There is the professor, there is the Italian, and of course it is not difficult to detect from what I say, from the examples I make, that I am a married man. And I have also 4 daughters, that is, I am a man used to obey to women. And this also is something of a social role, no? And we live social roles. Our life is made of social roles. Social roles are important and are positive. Every morning, millions of mothers, in the full exercise of their social role of mothers, wake up millions of children and prepare them to go to school. And millions of teachers go to school expecting children to be brought by mothers to the school, and so forth. Our life is articulated through a system of social roles. All this has 2 sides. On the one hand, it is something we have. I have my role as a professor. I have my role as an husband. I have my role as a father. I am the result of a certain number of roles who are overposed to one another. So much so that I can ask the question, who am I? Who am I really? If you do not consider the social roles, what is the identity, the original identity? And one can get lost in his social roles, so much so that it is no more an identity. It's just the sum of the social role he has. And then you can try to go to the ultimate depth in which you can really say, I. And does not correspond with your social roles. It is you. You may be alienated in your social roles so that you have lost your identity, and then you can recover your identity in the rebellion against your social roles. In most of our society, there is the deep-seated conviction that social roles alienate, and you become free when you revolt against your social roles. Children against the social role of daughters and sons, and parents against the social roles of husband and wives, and so on. The revolt. That, in part, this is true. You could take another great French, Camus, who also, I think, has been read by Wojtyła. And Camus is the recovery of your identity through the revolt. L'homme révolté is the title of his most famous book. But there is another way. If you think that you recover your originality through revolt, then you oppose to the objectivity of social life that lives through social roles your identity. And there is the conflict of the two. But you could find your identity also in another way. There are people, there are men who do not just live their social roles, they love their social roles. They live them from within. They find in their social roles the expression of what they really are. And you immediately feel the difference. When you meet a person who is a real professor, or a real father, a real husband, you notice a difference. That is being. You have, each one of us is in the world of having and is in the world of being. And you start existing as a true human being when you collocate yourself in the world of being. And you succeed in making use of what you have in the perspective of what you are. so that you are not possessed by your social roles, but you possess your social roles. And the social roles are the ways through which you bring to the fore what your interiority is. Well, personhood is exactly the capacity of reaching your true identity. And this is something that Wojtyła shares with the deepest intention of sociology, of phenomenology. Phenomenology tells you to learn to put within brackets all what you are not, all what you do not know, what you pretend to know because you have heard, you have read, but you have not experienced immediately, directly, so that you can become aware of your human experience as such. When you do this, explains Wojtyła, you don't do that because you consider that all what you have read has no meaning, or what you have heard has no meaning. No, all what you have heard or what you have read, all is not just, as in Heidegger, the word of the man sagt, what is said, does not correspond to truth. It's something that has to be ordered later. First, you must go back to yourself. You must become conscious of what is irreducible in you. And then you must order all other things starting from this point of view. And here you can see, we have said, I don't know who said this. One of you said something very important on mysticism. Who spoke of St. John of the Cross? You did, good. In Wojtyła, this does not begin with Gabriel Marcel. This begins, the first root is St. John of the Cross. It is the idea of the Castillo Interior. Go back into yourself. The Castillo Interior and St. John of the Cross is the place in which your true identity lives. And from there, you can, in the proper order, and giving to each one of the roles and of the experiences you make its proper value, you can possess instead of being possessed. And this is a fundamental feature of the phenomenological personalism of Wojtyła. And through this also you enter in contact with the other, and you find the correct relation to the other. Somebody, I don't remember who, also has made this morning the difference between two structures, almost opposing them one to another. The structure of finding yourself and the structure, the other reveals myself to myself. There are two structures that coexist and enter into a dynamic relation to one another. The child learns his identity from his mother, but then the child, when he becomes a young man, a young woman, has to separate himself from his mother and his father to discover what he really is. And he has to make of what he has received his own substance, and which implies also that he must refuse something and accept something and create that totality that is his personality. And when he thinks that he is, I am, I know what I am, who speaks when I speak? I speak. When one says this, then he falls in love, and the process begins again. And he has to relearn from the person he loves what he is. And he cannot say anymore, I, without including in his I the person he loves. If he has children, that is even worse or better, according to the point of view. That is a profound part of the personalism of Wojtyła. And I think he shares to a great extent this with von Hildebrand, this presence of these two dynamic structures that interact with each other and cannot be considered just as a before and later. No, and in any moment, although in certain moments one structure predominates, but in all moments they coexist with one another. And one last point, can I?
Please.
Just one last point, there's a different thing. This regards the other author, Michael has quoted, de Lubac. really, what we consider tradition very often is the deformation of tradition that has occurred in the generation before us. There is a wonderful book, he has quoted Le Drame de l'Humanisme athée of de Lubac, but there is another book that I love very much, that is Augustinisme and Théologie moderne. In this book, de Lubac shows that, well, in one sense, he shows that I was wrong in the beginning of my exposition of today, in the sense that I have presented you as traditional, a purely cosmological vision, which is false. That's Aristotle, that's not St. Thomas Aquinas. In St. Thomas Aquinas, you have Aristotle, but you have also St. Augustine. And many phenomenological elements are present in different forms in St. Thomas Aquinas, and the Thomistic tradition has eradicated them because in the 16th century, in the 17th century, they were so afraid of Protestants. Where are our Protestants? We have two. Yes. They were so afraid of Protestants, and they did not say this, I am simplifying, but not very much. They taught really that St. Augustine was Protestant, and so that St. Augustine has to be taken out of St. Thomas. And they have given us a St. Thomas much more cosmological than the real St. Thomas of the 13th century. Very often, I remember in the academy, we discussed on St. Thomas, and I tried to defend St. Thomas against the attacks of the phenomenologists like him, just pointing out all these elements that pertain to the true thought of St. Thomas, but had been, the object of a kind of purification, in which the specifically Christian in St. Thomas philosophy had been evacuated, leaving us a purely Aristotelic philosophy. This, I say this to make you aware of the fact that when I said the great philosophical revolution of Scheler and later of Wojtyła and von Hildebrand, it is a great philosophical revolution. But this philosophical revolution at the same time recovers elements that were there before the deformation of the tradition in the theology of the 16th, 17th, 18th century and further. And Wojtyła must be read in connection. He was a friend of de Lubac. He quoted the letter of Wojtyła to de Lubac. He was a friend, and he must be seen in connection with the great attempt of modern theology and modern philosophy, a part of modern philosophy, to recover that original contents. Being able to talk to modernity from a point of view that stands higher and above than modernity and is the solution of the open questions left by modernity itself. And that's the meaning of the relation of Wojtyła to de Lubac, but also to von Balthasar, to Ratzinger, and so forth. Ratzinger is the most mature expression exactly of that movement that starts with de Lubac to recover the Augustinian part of the Catholic tradition. It is not worth the while to say it has also a tremendous ecumenical impact, because doing this, you recover much of the Christianity of Luther, who was an Augustinian. Then you can discuss on the interpretation of Augustine, but you find a common ground.